Hi, everyone. We are so excited to have Kelly Cooper with us today. Kelly is a pediatric physical therapist with a doctor of physical therapy and board certification as a neurological clinical specialist. Her career spans over 18 years, during which she has specialized in neurological rehabilitation across various age groups. In recent years, Kelly has concentrated on neurodevelopmental care for critically ill infants, emphasizing the assessment and enhancement of developmental milestones, strength, coordination, self-soothing abilities, reflexes, and motor skills. Currently, she leads Wasatch Pediatric Therapy, a private practice in Salt Lake City, Utah, offering in-home pediatric physical therapy services. The practice serves families including Salt Lake City, Sandy, and Park City. So we are so excited to have Kelly here talking to us today about recognizing infant stress and how to help us.
Thank you so much for having me, Kayla. I really appreciate this opportunity. I love this topic of discussing infant stress and how we can reduce it because I find it incredibly useful in practice, as well as I wish I had known as a new mom 18 years ago. It's just invaluable. So we will get started. I am hoping to discuss common infant stress signs, what that looks like, how we can recognize it, and how we can help infants cope, as well as how we can teach them coping skills and how we can recognize when they're trying to cope and give general caregiver tips. So here we go. So infants can show stress in many, many different ways. Some standardized tests have over 60 different signs that caregivers can look for, score, and discuss. But there are some that are more common that we'll talk about tonight and pretty easy to recognize. Infants can show their stress in many ways throughout their body, their behavior, and we'll just get into it. So this little infant is having a few different little stress signs we can talk about. One would be finger splay. So finger splay is literally the idea of these fingers spreading into kind of what is called a stop sign. And the child can look like they're actually putting their hand up and almost, giving you this, please stop type of sign. And so you'll see these really widespread fingers. Sometimes it goes along with an arm stretched out. And that is what is called a finger splay or stop sign. This little child in this picture has a little tiny bit of maybe some of that going on, not too extreme. Back arching, number two, we see a little bit in this photo, but it's basically when a child is excessively arching out of their midline space. And so that is back arching. A startle can look, what you basically think of as startle. An adult that startles for a scary moment or a surprise, babies do something similar. So it can look like a big kind of sudden movement that then comes back in. It can be full body, it can be partial pieces of the body. Startle is a normal reflex in infants, and it can be brought about purposefully in testing. Providers will basically bring a child to a sitting position, quickly move them down to a lying position, and a normal response would be a startle of arms extended, legs extended, and then brought back into the body. So it's not unusual to have some startle, and it can be purposefully elicited. Startle can also be a stress sign. If a baby is a little overstimulated, you might see more startling, more frequency of it. So tremor can be seen. This can be as subtle as a little quiver of the chin and lips. It can look more like body shuddering. It can be, again, just facial. It can be more limbs. tremoring in infants, typically the less tremoring, the less stress, and kind of the better. So that's tremoring. Abnormal sucking can look like a lot of different things. It can look like a baby is chomping instead of sucking and kind of gumming down with their discoordinated suck, or it can be quite weak instead of what we would typically hope for with like burst patterns of sucking. Cortical thumb is seen at times. This baby in this little picture has a little bit of it. A cortical thumb looks like a posture like this, where your thumb is across your palm in a posture that can sometimes be inside of a fist. And so it would look a little bit like this. And it can be a sign of stress, and it can also be an interesting position that is great to try to help a baby work out of as a newborn. If it persists, it can be something that is unfunctional eventually when you're trying to work towards grasp. And so a persistent cortical thumb is a great reason to reach out for advice. And intermittently, it can be seen as a stress sign with infants. Fisting also as well. So this is just the idea of like really tightly fisting your hands. Abnormal posture can be any number of postures. Typically, it'd be more of like an extended posture or an asymmetrical posture. And we don't see a whole lot of that in this picture. There's a little bit of arching. Let's move on. So here are some continued types of ways that babies will show their stress. I want to talk a little bit about state regulation. We're going to take a little bit of a side piece, because one idea is the inability to regulate state. So what does that mean? What does state regulation mean? Well, babies have typically 5 different natural states of alertness. So you have deep sleep, which is like it sounds. So asleep, there's not much movement. They're out, they're deeply sleeping. Light sleep is more active, where you might see some fidgeting movement. You might see some eyes moving underneath the closed eyes. Some babies sleep with their eyes open, but light sleep is a little more active. Drowsy is a place where babies are starting to open their eyes a little. There's not really a great focus with the eyes. They might kind of come in and out of an alert state. Drowsy, they look just like they're waking up. Now, quiet alert is kind of this golden place where the baby is bright-eyed, awake, looks like they are ready to learn. They are calm. They are in really just a perfect state for learning, bonding. It's a lovely place that we all would love that our babies can be in as much as possible. It can be a challenge to achieve at times. And then you move towards kind of increased stimulus, which would be fussing, which is starting to look like, more active, maybe a little bit of crying moments. On standardized tests, babies aren't classically crying unless they've been fussing more than 15 seconds, which is kind of interesting. But fussing can look a lot like crying. And crying, of course, is where we're basically, we're crying. So the point of understanding these states would be a stress sign of a baby can be the inability to achieve a quiet alert state, that bright-eyed learning calm phase. It can mean extreme irritability, where you're jumping around from states. It's hard to stay out of crying. Maybe the baby's, switching back and forth, crying to drowsy, or, can't be awake without fussing. So those can be signs of stress. And then of course, you have the abrupt state change. You're bouncing around back and forth. And within cry, there are some types of crying that are considered stress signs. And those would be a really high-pitched cry, a monotone cry that sounds just like that, kind of an odd level cry, and then or a weak, very quiet cry. So as you can see, babies have a lot of different ways of communicating with us. There are also ways that they communicate that are not behavioral so much, but more body functions. The top 5 points, in my opinion, are a little more common than the bottom 3. So sometimes you can have sweating. This can be, even just little small places above the lip, on the face. Babies, as with adults, tend to have genetic patterns of sweating and can sweat in different places throughout their body, like an adult would. Spitting up, when it is considered stress related, is different than a little bit of spit up after eating. This is more kind of like an all of a sudden spit up in the middle of a behavioral kind of upset phase. So not necessarily related to feeding. Hiccuping is an interesting one because sometimes it's just so cute and it seems like, oh, they're hiccuping, how adorable. It can actually mean they're a little overstimulated at times, especially if it's prolonged. Sneezing is one where babies will sneeze repetitively if they are having a little bit of stress or increased stimulation. So technically, several sneezes in a row is perhaps a sign of stress, not necessarily one. Same thing with yawning. It would be several yawns in a row, not just a yawn. But a baby that's yawning over and over again several times in a row, that's actually sometimes a stress sign. These bottom 3 are typically more related to body systems. So pallor would be suddenly being quite pale. Modeling is a look of blotchy skin that is kind of uneven in color and a little bit, sometimes a little bit of redness and whiteness, or depending on the skin tone, different coloring of blotching. And cyanosis is basically a little bit of the purpling look. This picture has a little bit of cyanosis look to the feet. It's probably, just a brand newborn picture is what this looks like. It's a stock photo. But the bottom 3, in my opinion, pallor, modeling, and cyanosis, are a little less common and would be a little more concerning to me if I saw those. And I think those would be great reasons to speak to your pediatrician. And of course, you always could speak to them at any time about any, amount of stress signs that you're seeing. But I would probably be a little bit less comfortable with saying pallor, modeling, and cyanosis personally. Okay, so we've talked about different ways that these little babies will show us that they have stress. And more importantly is, now that we have some of this information, how do we help them decrease their stress as caregivers, parents? What do babies do to handle stress? And I thought this might be useful to talk about. The first tip would be decrease stimulus. Now, that can mean perhaps this child is in a loud environment, or there's a lot going on, there's a lot of expectation on the child, meaning perhaps like, well, one stressful time, bath time, right? You are getting sensory feedback. The child is probably not, swallowed and contained as they typically are. Something about the environment could probably be taken down to bring down the stress level. So think about, if you're seeing stress signs, one first thing on my mind would be, what can I do to decrease the stimulus to this child, meaning, can we do something about the environment? Can I do something about the way I'm handling them, where they have less work that they need to do, or they have less that they need to take in about their environment? Typically, this can really help decreasing stimulus. So this baby in this picture is showing us some nice coping methods that babies do. So you can see we've got this little left hand up to the ear and the right hand up to the face. These are both really great infant coping strategies. Some babies love to sleep with their little hands right by their ears. Sometimes they're mouthing their knuckles or have a hand right by their face. But hands to mouth for sucking and hands to ears positioning are two really great positions that soothe newborns and infants quite well. One way that we can help promote this would be when they are swaddled, bundling their hands close to their face, or sometimes, you could have a hand by the ear. You'll be able to tell which, position a child prefers, but generally positioning so that they can have hands free near their face is a really nice position for infant soothing. It's a little difficult with newborns when they have those kind of long scratchy nails, and sometimes they're scratching their faces, and the tendency is to cover their hands with the little sleeves or mitts, and that all has its place as well. But I'd recommend sometimes, if not more often than not, having the hands free so that babies can have their little knuckles to their mouth and explore a little bit for soothing. So that is, okay. So visual locking. Some infants will really use this strategy where if they are experiencing stress, will find your eye gaze and just lock in. I mean, they are looking at you like they're looking through your soul. And for some infants, that is a great way that they are handling their stress, because it helps them orient to something comfortable and something familiar, which is often a parent's face. It helps them organize their little body so that they can stay at midline and stay focused. So sometimes just getting their attention and trying to get a visual focus can really help them. Infants have a short range of focus, about 12 to 18 inches initially. Excuse me. Sorry. And so if you are practicing visual locking, you want to be pretty close, but visual locking is a great method. Physiological tuck. The idea of the physiological tuck is basically in the womb, we are kind of in this squished, cramped space where we are flexed, our hands and arms are flexed in, our feet and hips are flexed in. We are tucked into a little ball, essentially. And for a lot of infants, this can be an incredibly soothing position to basically bring their body back into a little bit of a tuck. So you would take this child and kind of fold their little hips a little bit towards their head, bring their hands, and you're basically folding them into what would look like a position in the womb. And that is a physiological tuck. So you've got the elbows in by the body, the hands by the face, the knees in by the tummy, and kind of knees bent, hips bent. Everything's kind of tucked into a little position that you might find a baby in the womb. And that is what is called the physiological tuck. Swaddling with hands to midline, I talked about a little bit. Really feel strongly about this. I think it's just such a great position. It can be a little tricky if kiddos have feeding tubes, or some other reason why maybe they just keep scratching their face, or maybe they have medical lines. But in most situations, it's really just quite doable, and really in all situations it's doable. we need to just also practice safe swaddling and remember the pediatric guidelines that once infants show signs of having the ability to start rolling, swaddling is no longer safe at that point. But typically over the first couple months, swaddling is a great way to go. Skin to skin. So everyone loves skin to skin. Skin to skin helps regulate babies and moms physiologically, helps decrease stress for the baby and the mom. It's a beautiful position to help promote bonding and breastfeeding. It is very useful in stress management. So honestly, in this picture, I think this little baby might be happier if it were a little more kind of chest to chest, skin to skin than on the side. We could probably tuck this little baby in a little bit, but skin to skin is very useful. Oh, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Caudal cephalic pressure is also related to that physiological touch, or excuse me, physiological tuck. Caudal cephalic pressure is this idea, again, of containment, almost mimicking the womb. So basically with this type of pressure, you're gently placing a hand on the baby's head, gently placing a hand on the baby's bum, and kind of compressing towards each other. So you're almost not squishing, but you are putting a little bit of pressure to kind of bring the baby towards that tuck. I should have brought a little doll for this presentation, I'm realizing. But anyway, so caudal cephalic pressure is this kind of, it's like an accordion contracting. So you're giving a little bit of gentle pressure through the head and through the bum so that the spine has a little bit of pressure, and it can be really soothing for babies to have, again, a little more contained pressure. And we also tend to sometimes call that containment. Same idea. You've got this like general pressure and kind of containment. So talking, singing, shushing, every baby's different. And I think that, you know, sometimes what works for one child, maybe there's this special song or certain position, voice, parent, caregiver, that can really be very powerful. Light upward sway, I feel like is magic. And so basically if I'm holding this little baby and their head is up here and their bum is here, it's literally just this upward sway. It is more relaxing to them than other directions. It's less stimulating than like, you know, rocking back and forth like this, but kind of a gentle upward sway is very soothing and seems to work on everybody. So let me just switch screens here. Okay, here's some other ideas for environmental changes. So this slide, I have a few kind of conflicting ideas on this slide, and I realize that, but we can talk about that. So decreased stimulus shows up again. And this can mean noise, this can mean bright lights, this can mean, I guess those are the most common. But think about, are there things that can be done to decrease the stimulus in the environment? If we think this baby is quite worked up, quite tense, quite stressed, what can we do to kind of take it down a notch? And softer lighting, quieter environment, those two can be really helpful. We don't want it dark because filtered light throughout the day, even during daytime naps, helps the child stay regulated to kind of this idea of day and night cycling. And so having it completely dark all day, it can be disorienting and difficult to work towards kind of sleep, you know, more sleep at night eventually. Here we go again with this promote midline physiological tuck positioning. This can be really helpful with positioning for sleep, which is of course always recommended to have babies sleeping on their back right now. And With that, though, you can swaddle to promote that physiological tuck with the hands and the knees in by the body. And so the upwards part of the slide, I would say decrease stimulus. Now, especially, during wake times or for older infants, they could also be a little stressed out of boredom. And so that's when you might want to consider adding, your high contrast imaging. It can be right near the sides of the crib or up on a mobile above them, mobiles and mirrors. I need to talk again about the safe sleeping environment. It is not recommended to basically have any toys or extra blanketing inside the crib. It's not recommended. Sleep pillows, not recommended. Basically, the baby should pretty much be the baby in the crib and not anything else. The swaddling is considered safe for the first couple months and still until signs of rolling. But we need to be mindful of safe sleeping environments. This picture actually doesn't look like it has the safest crib. I feel like there might be some blankets in there and some cushioning that, is not appropriate. So I'm not sure, I can't quite see back in there, but mindful of a safe sleeping environment. And if anyone has questions, I just, strongly recommend that you look up American Academy for Pediatrics. They have all sorts of guidelines on this. So the last point on here, I have promote symmetry in the environment, and the environmental stimulus for cervical ROM is range of motion. One issue that comes up early with little infants can be the idea of preferring one side more than the other, especially with turning your head and with sometimes it comes from tightness in the neck, sometimes other reasons. But if we promote symmetry in the environment, it can be a really great early opportunity to help maintain normal range of motion, good head shaping. It can be one of the first things that we can do to really give these babies a good opportunity for that. And so since we're looking at this anyway with stress, well, it's something good to think about. What can I do to make this symmetrical? And what I mean by that is sometimes I'll hear, I'll see little babies that are preferring one side or the other. And sometimes it's so simple and it can really just be, well, they're in a bassinet next to the bed and they'll always want to look towards the parent, and that's so natural as a baby. They're gonna turn their head towards the sound of your voice. And so for instance, if the bassinet's on the left side of the bed and they're always going to turn their head to the right to hear you all night, could contribute to wanting to turn the head to the right more. Not always so simple, but sometimes just little changes in the environment. So if you walk into the nursery, are you always walking in from the same side? And are they always going to turn their head to look at you the same side? Or can we orient them in the crib so that they have equal opportunity? It's just a thought, food for thought. So when thinking about stress, what can we do about the environment to either decrease stimulus, or if they're older and maybe, need more, increase the stimulus? And then how can we do that in a way that promotes symmetry? Okay, I put this on here, just a second. This series of soothing strategies is part of a standardized test, and I thought it was an interesting concept to bring up because infants typically need a certain amount of assistance, but then also can self-soothe themselves to some extent. It is very useful information to figure out what does that mean person to person. So for instance, if a baby's really upset and you walk into the room and notice that just the sound of your voice can calm this child down, they might be someone that is calmed just by this number 2 on the scale, face and voice. The idea is increasing on this scale 1 through 8 is basically an increased level of support. So as a caregiver, we will, during this test, go through basically first just trying to make eye contact with the child, face, just putting your face near their face within focus. Is that enough to calm them down? Okay, well, if that's not enough, how about face and voice? Just close enough where they might be able to see you, close enough where they can clearly hear you. Okay, does that work? Okay, maybe not. Okay, hand on the belly, just gentle pressure, hand right on the belly. Is that enough? Sometimes that's just enough. Holding the hand on the belly with the hands at the midline, holding them in a little bit more of this tuck. You've got the hands in, and then you have your hand on their belly. Sometimes that's enough. Picking them up in your arms, sometimes that's what it needs. And then holding, rocking, swaying while holding. And then perhaps wrapping them up, holding, rocking, swaying. And then pacifier is on here as kind of the final piece of like, well, did any of this other activity work? Okay, well, if not, let's try pacifier. This isn't necessarily me saying that I think things like this should happen in an order. It's just a food for thought, because in one portion of one standardized test, this is what a caregiver will go through. And one concept that it brings up to me is, well, they might actually need less help calming themselves than we know. But we won't really know that unless we give them a chance to try calming with a very little help. And the value of teaching and knowing what your infant might need for help to calm themselves is, ideally we want them to be able to soothe themselves. It's a life skill. It's one of their earliest, most valuable life skills. And it is a skill that will help a parent get better sleep at night. If this little kiddo can wake up and do something to calm themselves, then it might buy the parent another period of time, where they have better rest. And so it can be so useful for families. And it can be really useful as a caregiver, because it can help you understand better how much feedback do I need to give this child? At what point does it work and not work? And then so then it helps you moving forward know, okay, well, this worked last time. I pretty much just could put my hand on their belly and they were calm. You're kind of decreasing other stimulus, but putting the hand on the belly, just that was enough. So this can be a useful idea. So I like this idea of how much help did it really need? And can we get to a point where we only give as much as needed to help them learn skills, but then also help be effective, help get to the point where that that's what they needed. So hope I'm being clear. Here's back to this idea of visual focus. So this little cutie is doing our little hand splay, but that's not really the end of the world. I mean, they look pretty calm and I don't see many other stresses. Maybe the eyebrows, maybe little furrowed eyebrows. They might be visually locking to calm themselves, but that could be a really good thing. And it can be a wonderful way for early bonding and early infant orientation. So again, this idea of visual locking, infants focus quite close in, 12 to 18 inches at first. Midline, this idea of your face lined up right with the middle of your body, is a comforting, calming, and kind of orienting place to be. This little guy's looking towards the camera. He's not quite midline, whatever. He's adorable. He, she, I can't tell. But you could probably bring them more midline if you're using this as an exercise. So encourage midline, animated facial expressions. Really just once you have eye focus with this child, big expressive face can help them be more interested. Animated toy presentation, you can do the same thing. Nice little gentle rattle, same thing, quite close to their face. Slowly scanning side to side. You can move your head in front of them. They should be able to start gently watching you with their eyes. And of course, there are milestones for how, far infants can scan at certain ages. But earlier on, just this activity can be a really nice bonding activity, and it can be a nice soothing and de-stressor activity for kiddos. It's best if they're in that quiet alert phase where they're calm, they're focused, they look ready to learn. Okay. Okay. So I hope that we can at least recognize a little bit what some infant stress signs might look like, what we can do to decrease them, how we can support a calm environment, how we can encourage the infant to soothe themselves. So remember, that might be just figuring out what kind of assistance they need, or helping with those positions that encourage the physiological tuck or hands to face, and how to soothe. So that's about where I'm at with this for right now. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions.
I had a few questions. Do you know when it is safe to put any items in the crib with a baby? Or not even baby, even toddler. Like my son is 2+ years old and I'm still kind of nervous to put anything in there.
I know. I'd refer you back to the American Academy of Pediatrics. I don't have memorized, ideas on that, but I do know that it's generally not safe to have extra items in the crib because you're worried about the possibility of suffocation if you're, rolling towards extra blankets or pillows or lots of toys. That's the main risk. And later on, one risk would be, could they climb up on the toys and then, accidentally be taller than you thought they were going to be in the crib and end up falling out of the crib. So, I mean, there's kind of different safety concerns that come with the items based on the age. So I think I would look up the recommendations and then, talk to.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I was just thinking of, I wonder if there's any research out there about little infants that need a lot of this tactile, especially I forgot the wording, but the one where you're kind of squeezing. And then all of the like sensory swings and sensory, that young toddlers and young children use these days, because I see it so much. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, there is some research that talks about actually too much stimulus and kind of what the recommendations are for stimulus. So yes, there is a lot out there about that. I also feel like in general, swings are meant to be, quite limited and recommended to be very short periods of time. And similarly with like bouncers or the little chairs that vibrate, we all want to, it should all be pretty limited. And part of that is you want to be able to control the stimulus to a child, but then also part of it's the idea of being in a container too many ways in too many positions and places throughout the day. So limiting that is great as well. So.
Okay, you didn't touch on this, but now it brings me to one other question, which is, do you have any thoughts on the snoo? Because do you know what the snoo is?
I don't know what the snoo is. It sounds like a Lorax book. I mean,
it's a crib a lot of people really like because you swaddle the baby, and then there's two little straps that hook. So it's been approved as being safe. But the whole point is that as the baby gets upset in the night and cries, it starts rocking the baby, and it has 3 or 4 levels, so it can get to like like pretty crazy. And basically, if the baby doesn't calm down and then it decrease, it'll then turn off and alert the parent to come.
Oh, interesting.
But I feel like I remember a lot of PTs, OTs having mixed feelings, feeling like that might not be great for their neck or just things like that.
I mean, it brings up mixed feelings just hearing about it. I'd love to see it in action. My first thought would be, well, how contained are they? I mean, are we in a straitjacket where there's no movement allowed at all?
Yes.
And I could see that being a concern at older ages, and then the idea of if there's always a lot of stimulus provided for the child to calm, it could, in theory, and I don't have research to back this up, I need to look into this to see, more specifics, but intuitively what I've seen in practice is it can limit their opportunity to learn how to calm themselves if there's always a lot of stimulus brought in to calm. And so it is a valuable skill for some self-soothing. Now, of course, we don't want like red in the face, purple screaming babies that have lost their little minds because they're so upset. Not good. But a little bit of fussing, and then maybe they learn how to calm themselves down. That can be really valuable. That is like an activity of daily living for a baby, if you will. I don't know. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're gonna have to look up. You'll have to look up a video and email me and tell me your thoughts.
I always feel like families do need to figure out what works best for them. I mean, as a parent, you also have to get through the night and maybe go to work the next morning at 7 a.m. Who knows what is expected of people, you know? And so there's a lot of personal choice that goes into like what is right for your family, what is right for a baby. And we can't really know that for people necessarily, right? Like they have to an extent figure out what works, you know, for their baby and their family. I mean, I can't give these ultimate, you know, this always works or this never works, because everyone is so different and everyone's situation and needs are so different. So
Definitely.
it's tough, but it sounds like a really interesting product. I mean, there's so many great things that, you know, I didn't have when my kids were little.
I know, it's always changing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So there's 2 other people. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, and
I'm
so
all good, but thank you,
contact me directly if you have any other questions. I'm not the best public speaker, so I get a little disorganized and jump around a bit. And if anyone has any questions or something wasn't clear or they want more information, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.
Thank you.